Hi everyone. This is Kyle Falzer, pronouns he, him. I'm a member of Suffolk County DSA's electoral working group, and I'm happy to present to you all today an interview and discussion with our endorsed candidate for New York State Assembly, Mr. Dylan Rice. Welcome, Dylan. Dylan, just a quick intro, is running for New York State Assembly District 8, which covers a slice of northwestern Suffolk, includes the communities of Smithtown, St. James, Hauppauge, and Kings Park, among others, of course. And I'm really stoked for our endorsement of Dylan and to have the chance to talk with him today. So Dylan, thanks again for taking the time to talk. Did I miss anything in my intro, or was that pretty good?
That sums it up. I mean, I'll go in depth about why I decided to run and everything like that for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one housekeeping note, because 2020 and the pace of current events these days, I just want to mention that we're recording this conversation the afternoon of October 16th, just for reference, because who knows what could happen between now and Election Day as people are watching this, hopefully, over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, Dylan, just tell us a bit about yourself and why you chose to run for Assembly.
Yeah, sure. I'm Dylan Rice. I'm running for the Democratic ticket in the 8th Assembly District to represent my community. I grew up in my community, I worked in my community, and I've lived in my community my entire life. And I really wanted to see a different set of representation in Albany. Our current representative is one of the most right-wing members of the Assembly. His voice continues to shrink as Democrats win statewide, and it's only going to get worse in 2020. The GOP is collapsing federally, and I'm imagining the same thing is going to ripple to the state side. So it's really, his voice is shrinking, and we need more than ever, especially with COVID, a voice for our community at the table, because if it wasn't obvious, New York politics is mostly controlled by the city. I love the city. I went to school in the city. But everybody in New York deserves a seat at the table, deserves to have their issues heard, and I want to be that for Long Island. I want to make sure we're getting our just due.
Yeah, absolutely. Just I guess then to jump straight into the issues, I thought I'd start out with a COVID response. And, because we live under capitalism and people's survival hinges on their ability to sell their labor for a wage, there are lots of Long Islanders in crisis right now: housing insecurity, food insecurity, healthcare insecurity, education, all these different things, all these fundamental sort of material needs that we all have, a lot of people are struggling with. And so, how would you rate Albany's response to the pandemic over the last several months?
We're lucky we had a Democratic majority Senate. I'll say that first and foremost. That was a huge win, specifically right before COVID, because if there was a Republican majority Senate and they were able to shoot down what the Assembly passed, it would have been very problematic for middle class and working families in New York. That being said, we did some great progress, including eviction moratoriums will continue to extend, because obviously the pandemic is not going anywhere for the moment or for the foreseeable future. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I brought this up when I was even debating with my opponent. The whole concept of valuing the economy over human lives. The whole thing is, if there's no human lives, there's no economy. It collapses. You need healthy working people to be able to run the economy. We should have followed the example of every other country that seemed to have a better grasp on it than we did. Obviously, a lot of this is a problem with the federal system of government. If the top branch can't handle it, it falls down to the states, and the states were basically picking up the pieces. We were lied to by the federal government, and New York is doing surprisingly well considering that fact. We were the hardest hit at the beginning, and now we're starting to get a grasp on it. The states that either ignored basic science or ignored basic policy are suffering the most right now, and they're going to continue to suffer until they start getting it together. But we really do need to focus on how we protect folks who are not working, because that's how you actually protect the economy. If people are just drop out of the system, they're not able to sustain themselves right now, they're not going to have a good time coming back. It's very difficult once you hit that spot. It's not easy to rise back up. I know that's the pitch for laissez-faire. Oh no, if they work hard enough, they get a good job. No, if you are in a bad spot, it's tough to get out of that spot. New York has an obligation to help the folks that they told to stay home, the businesses that they told to close. It's their responsibility to either fight for federal funding to get it done or to prioritize how to do it statewide.
Yeah, and to that point, are there any because of course there are, I'm sure, lots of bills and such floating around the Assembly put forward by progressive members that maybe might have provided more help for Long Islanders and such like that. So is there anything like that you would look to support when you get into this assembly, or any sort of ideas that you would be bringing on your own to the assembly to help expand or create new forms of help for Long Islanders?
Yeah, I'm happy to say, thankfully, a lot of this stuff has been covered by the folks that are already there, which is good. That means I'm going there to support them, bring in my own opinion, and make sure Long Island's voice is heard in these discussions. Because again, a lot of the political power rests in New York City. There's still, thankfully, a lot of the support has been statewide. It has not been specified to the city. There's been a good amount of support. We still need to get some stuff done. In regards to fixing fiscal situations within New York, the idea of not taxing billionaires to me is insane. Before COVID, they were already getting by very easy. They had the best tax system set up for them. They're hoarding their wealth. CEO salaries have increased about 400 times more than workers. And to say that they're already burdened by the tax code is insanity. That's one of the easiest, simplest, common sense solutions to get some revenue. It doesn't fix everything. It's not like, oh, we tax the rich, bottom, it's over. No, there's a lot to do. But to ignore that very easy way to handle this to help get that process moving is insane. So making sure that stuff gets through is massively important. And I know Governor Cuomo vetoed it, and there's been a lot of resistance from some of the higher ranking folks. We cannot pretend that this is not the best way to fix it. When the Great Depression happened, FDR didn't go, all right, folks, I got a lot of wealth. We're going to cut your taxes. We're going to make sure you get to keep it all. And we're just going to let the middle class figure this out. He said, no, you have been skimping and saving. You haven't been contributing anything to the economy. You've been hoarding it, and you've been using loopholes to keep more money than you're supposed to. We're going to make sure you pay what's due. That's what we need to do. That's one of the biggest ones. And we talked about in the debate today about cutting certain things. And one thing I said is, we're not punishing working people when we do cuts. We're not going to go, this is an unnecessary service because for some reason, yeah, we can say this isn't worth the time. At no point in this entire experience has my thought been, let's punish the people most affected by it. To even go that route is horrible and abhorrent in every single way. We need to build the middle class. If you assist the middle class, this economy is going to get saved. If you hurt the middle class, hurt working people, and save the rich and let them keep going the way they're going, there's not going to be an economy. It's going to collapse, and they're going to be, well, I got mine. I'm good. Let them figure it out. So really prioritizing getting New York back in the hands of working people and middle class folks is the best way to save this situation. Obviously, health comes first, making sure we get a vaccine, making sure we can do it in a safe and productive manner. But look at Europe. They basically paid the salaries of workers so they could stay home. This would have been a lot easier if we just said, everybody stay the hell home for about a month. We're going to keep you covered. We're going to make sure businesses don't close. We're going to make everybody square. Instead, they said, we're going to handsy-pansy with the disease. We're going to shut some stuff down. We're going to let some other businesses. What happens is that the cases go up again. We're getting the second wave. It's going to be even worse than the first time. The economy is going to suffer I imagine about double what it did already. Mm-hmm. To me, it's the complete failure in basic understanding of science. There's a disease. People are sick. They can't work. How do you stop a disease? You get people to stay home. You just let for about a month. If you need to do more, that's what you do. Italy, France, and everybody had this out. They're getting more cases, but they really did nip it in the bud in the beginning. But we never did that, and we're struggling to get to where we need to be. I think this statistic, and I might have it wrong, we're 4% of the population, but 20% of the deaths in the world. The United States of America, the greatest country in the world, has the most deaths for this disease, and we had months in advance to get ready for it. So it's a joke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one wonders what kind of what forces prevent, that sort of response, which as you pointed out was very very necessary. Yeah, it's almost like our economy is perfectly capable of providing for people's basic material needs, but we just happen to choose not to.
It's the fallacy of, for the rich, it's always on the brink of collapse if you do anything to us, but we're also doing well. The economy's booming. We're fine. It's there's this cognitive dissonance that goes on. It's cut it. Work, the businesses can afford to pay their workers more. The concept of an increasing minimum wage, collapsing businesses, that's bull. Productivity has skyrocketed. Wages have stayed stagnant. It's facetious lies to the entire populace, and it's just a continuation of making working class and middle class families the scapegoat. They have to save the economy. It's their job. Put your life at risk. Keep Wall Street happy. Bada bing. Everything's going to be fixed. Nonsense.
Yeah. And what would you say to critics perhaps of raising taxes on the wealthy, saying they're gonna move away or stop creating jobs and things like that. That's something that I often hear when I have this conversation with people who don't exactly see eye to eye.
This came up in the debate too, and I was always like, what's the best response to that? And I said, you know what? I realized it in that debate when my opponent brought that up. I said, they're not going to leave. You know who's already leaving? Me. The folks who cannot afford to live in New York State because the tax system does not benefit us. Those who cannot find high-paying job opportunities because the same folks that are saying, please don't tax me, are going, I'm not going to pay my workers a fair share. If they paid us a fair share, we probably wouldn't have to go, you need to pay back into the state. If capitalism was what it purported to be, a fair free market system, we would be getting paid a lot more for the labor we do. So it's just complete nonsense to say they're going to leave. It's New York. If you're in New York City, you're there for a reason, because it's New York City. I love New York City. I buy into the whole concept, the center of the world. I love New York City. You're not going to leave if your taxes increase a bit and you can still afford a multi-million-dollar penthouse. You're not going to go, oh, now this just really breaks the bank. Now I have to go to Florida. No. Oh, they're bluffing. Call them on the bluff. Make them pay their fair share. I'm not punishing, even though I should. Their lack of candor and their lack of respect for workers deserves punishment, but we're just going, no, you just got to pay what you owe. What you owe, what is fair. We're not looking to indict people for being rich and wealthy. We're looking to make sure that if you're going to do it, you got to make it fair.
Yeah, 100%. So moving on from COVID response and sort of everything that comes with that. Of course, along with and concurrent with the pandemic, we've also had the insurgent Black Lives Matter movement with police brutality across the nation, the murders of Black and brown individuals at the hands of police. And I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing your views on that. And then also the follow-up question would be, when you're in Albany, what can Albany do to help Long Islanders who are taking to the streets right now and are running into police brutality as they try to exercise their First Amendment rights and stand up for the marginalized communities who've really been hit hardest by the pandemic and just the entire system for hundreds of years before that.
Just to address that, like in general, yeah. I will make sure I do the introduction of. I am an Irish Catholic man from Long Island. I have family in law enforcement, so I'll stay out on the record. I grew up with family in law enforcement. My dad was a corrections officer in Nassau County, so my entire life has been hearing about law enforcement, understanding law enforcement, and me and my dad had frank conversations. Me and my family members had frank conversations. I go, "There's a lot wrong in the system, and it needs to be addressed." We agreed on some things, we disagreed on other things. It's a fundamental flaw right now in our society that policing has become politicized. Policing, public service. I made a joke earlier today. I'm like, imagine the DMV was politicized. And if you were a certain party, you might, or your certain race, you might get a different treatment at the DMV. It's a public service. All taxpayers pay into this. The people that are suffering the most under the system are the ones paying for it. It's insanity. And it's not wrong to go, the system itself has a lot of flaws. You can pull out, and there are, and I've met some, folks my age who decided to become police. When I grew up with them, some of the best people I knew. What I'm terrified of is they're going to be punished for being good people in the system as it currently exists. It punishes people who go, hey, that's not right. I signed up to do this job because I actually had an idea of what I could do for my community. If they speak up, if they speak out against the people in power, axed. They're a troublemaker, they're an insurgent, they're a radical. They'll make sure they have a tough time. And that's been confirmed. Everybody knows it. It's not a secret. That happens in jobs. If you're the one who's giving your boss a little bit of a problem, he's going to be like, I don't like this guy. I'm going to make sure I make his life difficult. So it disincentivizes people trying to improve stuff. It's been built this way. Obviously, we know the history of policing evolves from slave catchers, right? That's old history. We're way past that. We can't go, there's this immediate. There's been a lot of progress. But when things like this are still happening, there's still work to be done. There's no nice little end spot where we go, policing is fixed. That's not the case for anything. Things constantly change. Things evolve. Addressing the internal issues within policing is tantamount to rebuilding that trust. The idea that, oh, people protesting hate police, we just hate injustice. We want our society to be better. We want them to be the people that they purport to be. Protectors. ones that keep the peace. We don't want them to just be either like just defending themselves and seeing it as an us versus them situation when we're all members of this community. We're all paying the same taxes. We're all New Yorkers. We can't have this hierarchy approach to justice and ignore the inherent racial issues that still persist in the criminal justice system and just across society in general. To ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. We have to be frank, we have to be honest, and we have to legislate appropriately to make sure there's things on the books and that we can adjust the culture in general around how we approach policing. And it is not a political issue. This is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. This will benefit everyone. If that trust is restored, communities will be safer. The bad elements that we all like to point at, the bad police and the bad criminals, they're going to become a lot less because there's going to be a lot more trust built. So any criminals that make problems in their community are more likely to be outed by folks in the community who have that trust with police. No matter what, it's a positive step in the direction to go, hey, we got to talk about some of this stuff. We got to be frank. There's issues in the culture. There's issues in the law right now that hurt certain people and benefit others.
Mm-hmm. And so, of course, when, I've taken part in BLM marches and such, along with thousands and thousands of other Long Islanders, the law enforcement that we run into is county, Suffolk County Police Department, Nassau County. So can you talk at all a bit about what can be done from Albany to sort of address what you were talking about for these local police departments? Like, how does Albany relate to local police, and what can be done at the state level to push forward these reforms that you're talking about?
Yeah, all politics is local, is the old saying, and there's a reason Republicans have managed to hold such a grip on our country, even though they are the minority party. There's a lot less Republicans in the country than there are Democrats, and we're seeing the results of that and how they've influenced local politics. The state has a lot of power. I mean, we saw the repeal of 50A, which is a big step towards transparency for public servants. Great work. But a lot of this stuff is rooted on the ground. And you're right. I attended Black Lives Matter protests. In fact, I helped set one up in Hop On, and I had conversations with the chief in my area. Lovely man. We had a great discussion. He was like, we even said, we need more folks like you in politics. You're just honest. We're having a discussion. You're not seeing me as either a straw man, and he wasn't seeing me as a straw man. That kind of communication is huge. If I'm elected to the state assembly, I got to make sure that the folks that are actually responsible for these departments are doing that work. We have to incentivize it with either, using our funding, making sure we're going, hey, we're going to make sure we help you with this, but you do need to handle this problem with policing in the situation. If there's a conflict of interest, if you have police that are kind of staying under the radar who've broken their duty to serve, there's a lot of ways the state can pressure it. A lot of the reforms have been extremely needed. But it is a local and state combined issue and federal, because the federal government has responsibility, as they did a lot more in the Obama administration. I can only imagine why it hasn't been happening much in the Trump administration. You put the dots together. There's been a lot less federal involvement involved with local policing and going, you're violating numerous statutes and everything like that. It is on the onus of every level of government to get down and dirty with this problem and make sure that we're addressing every issue bit by bit. It's not just, we repealed this law for New York State, we're done. The local government has to handle it. I promise that we're going to make sure we utilize our voice in the assembly to make sure it gets done everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And earlier you talked about taxes and raising them on the wealthy to fund programs that will provide relief for Long Islanders. One other source of revenue for that's been floated by progressives and leftists has been the defunding of police departments and shifting money that's being used to pay police to handle things that they really shouldn't be handling and moving them over to programs that are better equipped to deal with the multiple crises that we have going on right now. Is that something that you would support?
Yeah, and I joked about this. I was on a forum last night with young Long Island voters, and I was like, it's amazing how easy that slogan was for the right to just go, oh my God, they want to abolish police and they want to get rid of policing. No, the concept is saying there's certain things that police either are burdened with, as in they're just given every one of society's ails to handle. Like, okay, the police can handle this, homelessness, mental health issues, drug issues. That's not what they're supposed to do, and that makes it very difficult for them to do the job that they're supposed to do well. It's as if you got a job as let's say a logger, like you're a logger of the force. Also, can you do the tax returns for this company? Can you handle this? Can you handle that? No, they are meant to be peacekeepers. They're meant to protect and make sure criminals are arrested and brought in front of a judge if they break the law. That is the job of police. It's not to be judge, jury, executioner. It's not to handle the homelessness crisis. It's not to handle mental health issues in the state. It's to be peacekeepers and enforce the law. By shifting resources specifically to target things that, one, cause crime. So if you address the homelessness issue, guess what? There's going to be a lot less vagrancy crime. There's going to be a lot more focus on just getting folks the help they need. And guess what? They're not going to be in that position where they commit crime. Crime is a result of poverty. It's not this thing in society we just go, oh, it happens, and I guess we got to make sure we have enough police to deal with it. You address it, and you address it directly. You don't just let it fester and go, well, there's always going to be criminals. It's not true. Crime is, it's specifically like, petty type crime that folks go to jail for a long time, is the stuff of desperation, of I have no hope in my situation right now. And that's a failure of society, and to just focus on punishment, throwing them in a system that is a revolving door type culture of like, I've been in jail. I have been able to do nothing with my life for 5 years. This is what I know. And they dump me back into society with no assistance. That's how you get folks back in jail. That's how you keep the prison population going. And we all know that there is an incentive to do that. Removing that incentive is another aspect of funding. No private prisons in any form. No form of prison labor whatsoever. It's wrong. It's unjust. Slavery is still legal in the United States due to the 13th Amendment. Disgusting. New York State, I'm speaking as a state assembly person. I wish I could go into Washington and try to hold a constitutional convention. But we have an onus on us to go, none of that applies to us. We're doing better than a lot of the union right now in regards to the different states in progress, but we're not this beacon of progress as we like to purport ourselves. We still have a lot of these issues within New York State. We're not this left state. We still have a lot of conservative ideas that kind of keep us in this problem. The idea that, no, we don't need to go forward, we need to go back. We made mistakes going this way. No, we're making barely enough progress. And one way to really hammer it in is to go, police cannot be militarized. This is not a war zone. They are not in a combat situation. There's situations, of course, where they're going to need to use a gun. It's not the same as having an M16 with a tank running down a suburban district in town. Insanity. It ruins that trust between community members and the police because it's terrifying. You think police, you think, I'm assuming most people think like, Norman Rockwell, the little kid at the thing, and an officer right next to him. That's like the ideal of like an American police officer right now. I mean, when I first watched the Ferguson protest, I remember going, those are police officers in the tank? Where did they get the tank? Why do they have a tank? Guess what? Private business makes money off that, for one. And it's also this further separation of police from their communities. It's basically an us versus them situation when it's an all of us situation. They're taking on, and this should be an honor duty of wearing a badge and going, I'm the first line of defense for folks that are just trying to get by. But right now it's like, I'm protecting and I'm in charge and this is like my purview. We got to really knock that down and make sure that it's clear that this is a public service. And we can, and again, I covered a lot with that, but on the aspect of like shifting resources, yeah, either we train police to handle this type of stuff, like mental health issues, drug issues, or we make sure that there's a way where if I, like for instance, if I had a mental health crisis or something and I felt the need to call emergency services, there's somebody else that's not a police officer that can come and help me. If those folks need a police officer because the situation is dangerous, yeah, there should be a route to do that. But the first response should not be, we're just going to send police officers because that's what we have. We've put every one of society's ails on police officers. We need to really approach this in a more, let's be honest, common sense way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you alluded to corporate interests and, of course, all the widespread corruption that we see in government in the way campaigns are funded and financed and such like that. Could you talk for a little bit about how your campaign is funded and who are your donors, and would there be any donors out there that you would refuse funds from?
Number one independent donor was Enron. That was fun. Got a lot of support from Enron. I don't know why. No, we completely grassroots. I made a joke. I'm like, I really hope, companies and ultra wealthy folks come into my office to talk to me about donating to the campaign. I want to waste as much of their time in my office so I can refuse them at the end so they're not doing it to somebody else. None of that crap. It has to be publicly funded. It has to be, because once money gets involved with democracy, it ain't a democracy anymore. The minute there's an interest of going, I can vote this way and make a lot of cash, what is a rational, let's be honest, in a system that incentivizes being wealthy, what is a rational person going to do? I can make that vote and I can make myself rich, and why it's not that big of a deal. I'm sure everybody else can handle it. There can be no conflict of interest with our public servants, specifically politicians, because remember, the crafting laws, it's not enforcing it. A conflict of interest with someone enforcing law is going, let's say I have an internal bias, especially like, let's say a racial issue with policing, that's a problem. The concept of a legislator who has a conflict of interest with folks who will make money on the laws that they write shows that we are a failed democracy. It is so pervasive in the system. It is in honesty, it technically is the most important thing to address. Existentially, climate change, because there's no earth, there's no politics. So. But the issue is we can't even address that unless we get money out of politics. So we're like, there's a bunch of gates to get in the world and the place it needs to be. Money, especially for conservatives who tout, faith and religion and Christianity, they seem to like a lot of, making sure the wealthy stay in it, making sure they can get their big donations, making, Citizens United, corporations are people. No. Democracy requires total subservience to the public you serve. You cannot have a second Lord. It's render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, what Christ said regarding the Jewish people in Israel paying taxes. And to me, it's embarrassing that we really haven't gotten a grasp on that enough. It is without a doubt the most pervasive issue in politics, and I'm proud to say that I hope they can waste their breath on me, because I'm never going to take the money. I would much rather have a grassroots funded campaign. Again, I want to move to public so people don't have to donate to political campaigns that they want. They're already suffering. They should have to desperately paying politicians who might fix the situation for them in a vain hope that they might get elected. It should be publicly funded. The ideas win and democracy wins. It's not, I have a bigger ad budget so people are going to know my name. It's both. It's absolute malarkey. I'm trying not to curse. I get mad about this issue.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, no, understood. And so, lots of special interest as a corporation. Also, police unions are frequent donors to political campaigns, especially here on Long Island. Is that another group that you would not seek funds from?
To me, it ties back to the idea of politicizing policing. That is beyond reprehensible. The PBA, and it's sad because the PBA is a union, and I don't think you could find a more pro-union candidate running for office right now. I think the percent of the workforce in New York unionized right now is like 23%. I want that 100%. I want every single person to be in a union, and especially a worker-controlled union. That's my goal, to make sure. Labor rights is my big thing. I love and want to expand labor rights to a very, very, very big degree. But police unions like the PBA, they do this horrible disservice of basically being the loudest mouthpiece for police across the board. They're the ones that are, they have connections to the media, the ones that are like the leadership. They might even be retired, but they still work with the PBA. Regardless, they're the ones that are voicing the opinion of police in general, because obviously a freshman or a rookie cop is not going to go to the media and go, here are my opinions on policing. I agree that there's issues here. They're going to get fired. They're going to get either like just hammered by their own, or they're going to just have a very rough time. The PBA is politicizing their own job, further eroding the trust between police officers and the community, and they're backing the most divisive candidate. If we're talking just federal, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an open white supremacist. If you want to rebuild the relationship between minority communities and cops, it's not by endorsing that guy. It's not by endorsing anyone. I'd be pissed if they endorsed Joe Biden. Active law enforcement should not be getting involved in politics. And specifically when it involves money too, because that's two levels. That's eroding the public trust because they're public servants, and two, getting involved in the corruption of politics through finance. Double whammy of just no good, very bad. No. The PBA should really be focusing on making sure cops who are wrongfully terminated, if they are really having labor issues, that's what they should be focusing on, not protecting police who broke their code, who did something illegal and who should deserve to be punished. A good union would make sure those workers are gone because they're not doing their job and they're hurting their fellow workers. But the PBA is so hyper-focused on PR and leaning into politics to kind of shield the idea that it becomes white noise. Now, there are people who literally think the PBA speaks for all police officers. I know that's not the case. And it's a shame that the folks who really want to get their opinion out are not allowed to speak.
So I think we are going to pivot here in a little bit. We did ask our electoral working group members for some questions to ask you, which we'll get to in a bit. But you did just mention supporting organized labor and how that's one of your biggest issues. So do you have a platform you'd care to share, or any ideas that you'd care to share about what can be done in the assembly to help out organized labor?
The sad fact is the first step is making sure nothing gets cut. Like right now, there's still active assaults on workers' rights and labor. It's not like I'm going in like in a very pro-union state. Right now, for the record, this is nationwide. Unions in the United States are either barely allowed to exist, or they have conflicting interests with the government or other private interests where they're really not serving workers to the extent that they should. There's some great unions out there that have done amazing work, and those are the ones that need to continue to propel forward. It's a sad state of affairs because the government is run by private interest, and guess who doesn't want more unions? Private interest. Because if their workers get paid more and they actually got to pay them a fair wage, it's not really good for their wallet. So clearly the government is engineered to be anti-union. I mean, for the Taylor Law, which prevents public workers from striking, to me, that's an egregious assault. Every worker has the right to strike. Obviously, with public workers, there's a real danger because it might hurt the public, but guess who's going to have to listen a bit more if they're allowed to strike? The people that actually are the ones responsible for making sure they're treated well. To deny anyone that right, to me, is wrong. It is fundamental First Amendment. It is fundamental basic ethics. If my workplace is wrong and is treating me wrong and treating my fellow workers wrong, I have to make it known. And strikes are the last option. You know, there's negotiations. You can actually have an honest discussion. But the fact that they already said, just you're not allowed to strike, we're going to fire you, is basically saying you don't have any power. We have the power. If you even voice it, you're out. Disgusting. So making sure we address that, making sure we keep the Triborough Amendment, which allows contracts in negotiation, if they're still being negotiated and then they expire, the benefits are still there because you're currently negotiating them. You can't drop people's benefits when they're actively fighting for them. It's going to cripple workers. You cannot do that. Again, these are just trying to protect and expand existing laws. I want to make it easier for workers to unionize. When I worked, I've had quite a few jobs. When I was younger, I worked like retail. I did work for a company I won't name. I won't shame them. I'll be respectful. I worked for them, and they showed me like anti-union propaganda. And I'm like, my mom's a Teamsters. You know, she's in a union. I know what a union is. To me, it's very problematic that a company can blatantly lie to their workers about their own rights. Obviously, they can't say you can't form a union. You might end up getting fired for unrelated reasons if you mention the concept of unionizing. Again, another thing we need to tackle. But they're within the law where they can go, unions are evil. They're going to steal your money with dues, and you're going to lose money. And the propaganda that's legalized regarding labor rights is insanity. It's a very, very broad issue, and it does tie in. I always say this, all these issues tie into each other. No matter what, one affects the other. If workers have increased rights, the middle class has more of a say, they're more powerful, the economy gets dictated by them, and next thing you know, a lot of these issues are resolved, specifically wealth inequality. That's like, there's a lot of different pathways. But the nonstop assault on unions, the constant demonization of them, especially by right-wing politicians and I don't even know what to call them, people that have radio shows that shouldn't have radio shows, that just spout out, unions are bad. It's a detriment, and it's insanity that the history of labor in the United States is not taught in the way it needs to be, in the sense that labor, when it first started, was violently put down by the state. It was, people were shot and killed. They hired private detectives, I guess, as a little means of separation, to basically attack, assault, and beat the hell out of people going, can we get paid a reasonable wage? We're dying, and this guy's making billions of dollars. Can we please live? That was the state's response only a century ago. It's a little bit more hidden now, but there's a reason only 23% of the workforce is unionized, because it is built to be that way. It's not people that don't want to do it, it's that they know they can't. And addressing that issue is the biggest thing for me. Labor rights to me is paramount, because it really does affect everything else. If the working class and middle class is built strong and able to actually affect change through their own ability and growth, a lot of these issues are going to be things of the past, because they're not going to be boxed out anymore.
Yeah, and certainly, and a lot of that state repression, since unions have been eroded over the last 50 years or so, that, I mean, we still see that state repression, as we were talking about with the BLM movement and things like that. Same forces at work, all interconnected, just like you say, just
State
sort of.
repression funded by private interest. Look at Joe Hill, IWW,
Mm.
union man, who was basically killed by the state of Utah under false pretenses because he was organizing copper miners, which is Utah's bread and butter. So they got him on a bullcrap charge. I think he actually admitted he didn't even like attempt to fight it because he thought he'd serve the cause better as a martyr. Could you imagine being in that situation? Like, I can give my life and maybe some of this stuff will get done, or I can, try and fight. And next thing I know, I'm a nobody. And like the fact that working people, the people in all of history who have suffered the most, who have been forced to bear the burden of everything in society, are the ones that are barely able to even go, can we please have an easier existence? Can we please just get what we earned? It's not about, again, this kind of ties back to taxes on the rich. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to make sure it's fair.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about like CEOs giving their entire wages to workers. We're talking about workers getting paid for what they actually do, which is keep these businesses running. I know everybody touts Jeff Bezos as like this. Who does the work that got him that money? Who does that work? It's the workers in the company. He can still make a lot of money. He founded the company. Very good. That's a good reason to start a company. It's a successful company. It serves a purpose. You do not get to punish the people that helped you build it because you want more of the pie. That's not how anything works. It's not just in any regard. They're the ones doing the labor. He's the one collecting it.
Yeah, no arguments for me. And it's not every day.
That's an easy punching bag. Bezos. I could name a bunch, but Bezos is easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not every day you hear the Wobblies mentioned by someone running for office.
I am a history nerd, and thankfully, I always joke. It's like, especially since I was a kid, I would usually go on a track. I'd find something very interesting, and then I would kind of go, "What's this thing they mentioned here?" And I would jump to the other track. I'm also a big music guy, specifically music history. I was listening to a lot of like Pete Seeger and whatnot, and I'm like,
awesome.
What is he talking about with these folks, running out on the street, singing a like kind of an altered version of a hymn to get people's attention? Next thing I knew, I found out about the IWW. Labor history, please. If anybody's watching it does not know about labor history, look up. Was it Blair Mountain? All of these things. It is almost like a mini Civil War. I actually saw someone describe that it as that on the internet. It's like actually the Civil War between working people and their government. It wasn't just states basically trying to keep slaves and the North trying to maintain the Union. That's a direct governmental Civil War. But the people's Civil War was labor fighting against the vested interests within the government that controlled everything. They suffered greatly for it. And we're kind of just we gloss over it. I mean, I know Trump's trying to do the 1776, education curriculum. I'm sure labor unions are just never going to be mentioned at all. Like the concept of the struggle for labor, muckrakers and things like that.
Yeah, no, history, obviously super important in understanding all of this. All right, so I think we're going to pivot over to some of the questions from our electoral working group members. Definitely living on an island, especially for folks like me on the South Shore, climate is certainly a big concern. And the state legislature, I forget if it was last year or the year before, time is meaningless now, but they passed the Climate, Community, and Leadership Act, which is basically, think of it as like a Green New Deal for New York, but have failed to fund it. And that will come along with a bill called the Climate and Community Investment Act. So direct question from one of our members, would you support that piece of legislation?
I hope that's an easy yes. I hope that you're into the actually, I want to talk about fracking.
Please do.
We can discuss that too, like transitioning and stuff like that, because that actually ties into labor too. Again, it's interconnected. At no point would we ever say that the folks who are trying to make a living are the ones evil here. It's the folks who are preventing any sort of transition, like to green energy to make sure the earth's protected. It's not the workers, and no onus and no blame should be placed on workers. We talk about, especially something like a Green New Deal. I know that's the general term for a lot of stuff now. I know, like on the federal level, it's what AOC originally introduced with Markey, and that is the actual Green New Deal. I'm happy that that language is actually being utilized in New York because that is exactly what it is. When FDR was the governor of New York before he was the president, he actually enacted a lot of the ideas that he brought forward in the New Deal when he got to the presidency. He tested it, he ran it in New York, and he said, "Oh, it works." And then he brought it forward to the federal level, and next thing you know, the economy was saved. Funny, laissez-faire capitalism doesn't do anything to help people. Who would have thunk? So we need to both, one, pass it and make sure that we go further, because the only way we're getting out of the situation is if we treat it as what it is, the most important issue. Again, I said earlier, nothing changes without fixing the financial way campaigns are conducted. Yeah. The next immediate step is making sure the Earth is able to survive. And funny enough, it's not even that the Earth's able to survive, it's that we are able to survive. The Earth will be fine. It will come back. It will get rid of this scourge that's existed on it for a few million years, and then it'll bounce back, but we're going to be gone. If our children have to wear respiratory masks in a century, we have failed immensely. I think it's a native proverb. It goes something like, we don't borrow the planet, or we don't inherit the planet from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And that type of mentality is key to everything. And it shouldn't just be, well, I got to protect my kids. You got to protect yourself. Because it is escalating every single day. It's not this far away thing. It's like, well, I'm going to be dead. It doesn't matter. It's nothing I need to worry about. Sandy is going to be peanuts compared to what's on the docket if we don't really start pumping the gas. Actually, I guess reverse, not pumping the gas, pushing the brakes on exactly how far this is excelled. Making sure, and here's the economic benefit, and I hope if folks are still kind of confused as to why this is extremely important for multiple reasons. You're not going to get manufacturing jobs or fossil fuel jobs expanding anytime soon, because folks are going, the tides are changing. Green energy is the way to go. Green energy is the way to invest. And we can get a lot of, like United States. Joe Biden actually really nailed it on the head last night in his town hall. He's like, I'm ashamed because the United States is best set to control the 21st century. We have everything at our disposal to make sure we're the center of green energy research, development, and manufacturing, provide all these jobs for folks, and actually be the leader in the world regarding climate change. We dropped out of the Paris Climate Agreement because, I had the word climate change, and I guess Republicans still want to deny basic reality. Go for it. Great for you. We're not going to buy into that anymore. We really need to start moving faster, investing in communities, getting high-paying union jobs that develop and manufacture green energy and green technology. And honestly, and I'm speaking obviously biased because I'm from New York, it's me trying to represent my state, it should be in New York because we have the education, we have SUNY, the largest public school system and the biggest employer in New York State. We have the space, we have the resources, we have the people, we have the capital, we have everything to get this done. And we need to emphasize it as both saving the climate, because if we're doing this, guess what? We're actually making progress. It's not just cutting existing problems, it's building the solutions. And we greatly build up the middle class and working class folks who then won't have to rely on a lot of the cheaper alternatives, which are bad for the environment. Again, all this is interconnected. It all builds up. It's like a big wave. Every little thing keeps adding to it. It helps get us to where we need to be. Climate change is not something that is a faraway issue. We are suffering from it right now. There are communities near the equator and that are literally across the planet. It's not literally just like heat. I know, every time I think about this, I get like just infuriated inside my own head. The Republican, it was either a senator or a representative who threw like a snowball in the Capitol building. He's like, oh, it snowed outside, so global warming's not real. No, it's climate change. It's not just about the heat. It's about everything. It's basically just a drastic altering of the Earth's climate that will either make it almost impossible for us to live here or make it impossible for us to live here. And for that reason, it's a literal existential problem that needs to be addressed. There's no sidestepping it, no tiptoeing around it. It needs to be, to me, it's the equivalent of World War II in the 40s. This is the unifying moment. This is the thing that's going to be our fight. And it needs to be taken as seriously as that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, another member question, again, environmental, about a specific piece of legislation. A fellow or state legislator, Democrat Monica Martinez, introduced a bill to ban wildlife killing contests in New York State. Looks like it's Senate Bill 4253B. And the question is, if elected, would you be willing to sign on to an assembly version of this bill to ban wildlife killing contests in New York State? I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not as popular on Long Island, obviously, as it is upstate. completely different culture, and that's something we do need to acknowledge. Like there's a very, very distinct difference between even downstate and upstate. And I know that even the phrase upstate will cause eyebrows to raise if anybody upstate's watching this. Very different parts of New York, very different mentalities with it.
Mm-hmm.
When I was speaking with folks in the Voters for Animal Rights group, I was actually shocked. I said, wow, half of this isn't passed already? Like things that I thought were kind of common sense, basic ideas that really just seem humane. Let's be honest here. A lot of this stuff we don't need to do anymore. We have alternatives to it. We have smart alternatives to it. To me, a lot of it is just kind of pride. This horrible idea that human beings have a right to trample over the environment and the world that we were lucky enough to be born into. And it really does. And I support. I want to make sure I'm not like, oh, just gonna talk about other things. No, 100%. To me, especially if it's if there's no, like, I hope that we can finally get to a point where there's just no such thing as killing for sport. Like there's just no need to do that. We need to have humane ways of addressing population control. And it's funny you mentioned deer. I got home last night and my folks are like, there's deer everywhere. There's deer everywhere. They're in the backyard. You got to watch out. I'm like, oh, okay. They've always been like kind of getting across. And when we discuss it, I'm like, oh, there's clearly humane ways to do this. We have to just kill them. There's a very real issue with that in my mind. It really, it kind of builds into this idea that we have a right to just interfere with everything, like without realizing the impact it will have. You can, of course, make the case, and let's be honest here, game hunting for deer isn't really something that could very much drastically threaten the population of deer. But why are we doing it? What's the gain for us? Killing an animal that was minding its own business. If you're going to eat it, that's a rationality. Good for you. I mean, hey. But if you have every other alternative to not do that, why would you do that? To me, it really is just one of those kind of archaic things. Like maybe when I was a kid, I was like, maybe I want to hunt. And then I thought about it. I'm like, no, why? To me, I empathize. Like I understand, especially if it's like ingrained in culture. There's certain things, and I mean, this is a thing you can even say. Like there's religious cultural traditions, and you never want to go, that's wrong, that's unjust if it's like something that's been ingrained. But there's certain things you got to draw a line and go, this is not good. No net benefit. No, it doesn't do any service. There's other ways to do it in a much more productive and safe manner. Common sense to me. I mean,
yeah, nature's having a tough enough time.
So we don't need to be shooting at it. To me, that's a bit on the nose. A little rough.
All right. All right. So this will be the last few questions here. We do have some members within Suffolk DSA interested in running for office locally here. And so just, I guess, as a bit of guidance for anybody watching this who is thinking of running for office, can you go into a bit about the process, about, what you had to do to become a candidate on the Democratic ticket? Some specific questions we have here are, how far out did you announce? How did you study up on finance laws? How did you learn those laws, if you did study? And just general recommendations for new candidates. So feel free to address that in any order or
I feel like it's not even fair for me to I'll tell you how to run for office. It's my first time running for office. I haven't been elected yet. Who knows? I could be the worst candidate that's ever run in this district. We'll find out on election day. Fingers crossed. No. I'm glad to be representing my community. I never bought into this concept that my community was all right-wing conservative. We don't want anything to change. Like, sure, there's folks like that. There's folks like that everywhere. There's folks like that in AOC's district. It doesn't matter. What matters is making sure you're putting that work in that shifts the fight for power. It's that step-by-step approach. It's not, oh, this is hopeless and I got to focus somewhere else. It's making sure, why am I best to serve my community? If you can't answer that immediately, you should not run for office. You need to have a very solid reason as to why you think you deserve to represent them and why you think you're going to be the best one to do it. There's like that, I forget the name of like the kind of psychological fallacy. It's the idea of like the people who run for office are the ones who probably should not, because they feel entitled to a position they think that I can do and I can fix it. I felt that I'm like, am I a hypocrite? Like, I almost feel bad. I'm like, I don't want to give the impression that I'm the only one who can fix it. I know it's like Donald Trump's favorite thing. It's just me, only I can fix it. That's the talk of tyrants, the ones who want to just rubber stamp something and go, my idea is the most important one. That's not how our democracy works. And obviously there's inherent flaws within the democracy. It's not really a democracy that's built out right now. But there is one thing that is very democratic, and it's local and state elections. It's the ones where you're really within your community and you really have to put in the work to get them to support you. I announced, I want to make sure I hit every, and if I missed one, let me know. I know, ask when I announced in February, right before COVID really got bad in the United States. So I campaigned traditionally for like, I think 2 weeks. I went to like a Democratic event in Smithtown, and that was like the first time I got introduced to the public as a candidate. Beautiful moment. I'm happy I got that before, because if it was over Zoom, I would have been like, hey. It was in public, so it was nice. It was a consolation considering everything that happened afterwards. It's been, to me, my issue is the least important. I don't get to run in public for office. No, I'm worried about the people I'm trying to represent. And that kind of mentality made me go, okay, I do want to run for office. I feel comfortable. I don't feel like a hypocrite. I am doing this for folks that are not myself. I'm not going in there for selfish interest. I'm putting myself on the line in my community, which is, again, it's majority Republican, at least in voter turnout. And I tried to defend. We had I think it was the first protest in Smithtown. A young woman from Central ISIP was organizing it. And it was funny when I was at another Black Lives Matter protest, I think it was in Port Jeff. And I was discussing it with someone else, and I'm like, is it fake? Because like for some reason, like it was tough to find who was organizing it. It wasn't attached to like any organization groups or anything like that. And my instinct, because obviously half the stuff going on with the white supremacists of these organizations and all the false flags to get people riled up, I was suspicious. What I did, instead of buying into that kind of fear that's pervasive in my community, I said, let me reach out to this person and find out what's going on. Next thing I know, young woman from Central ISIP knows everything she's talking about, knows the policy issues within, talking about like the actual economic things that impact racism in our community. And I said, oh, okay, let me make sure that my town knows this. At no point in my campaign was it ever the right, if like, I was being told to go for the middle to make sure you get everybody to support Black Lives Matter. They would have said, no, just keep it quiet, don't support it. And for the record, anytime I was at one of these protests, I refused to bring campaign literature. I never talked about the campaign. I marched as a citizen in my community. I was not there to co-opt the movement as I'm a progressive Democrat and that's why you should vote for me because I'm at Black Lives Matter. It's like, no, I'm here because this is what's important. I would have been doing that if I was doing any other line of work. And I wanted to make that abundantly clear. But when I reached out to my band, it's like next door to that website, not exactly a great pool. That's like pretty specific. I got called Antifa. I got called a communist. I got called an agitator. I think somebody might have doxed me, but I was like, I live here. You can come over and we can talk. I don't really care. But to me, that's like the type of wherewithal you need. You need to face your community across the board. I'm not running to represent Democrats or progressives or independents. I'm running to represent District 8. If you really want to run for office, you have to make sure you're talking to everybody. You have to make sure you're actually hearing their concerns. Because if you ignore them, again, it's very tough to flip Republicans. I'm not saying you have to go right down the middle to get everybody. I'm saying you have to be honest because that's what people really want to hear. If you have the policy, if you have the facts to back you up, you should be able to convince anyone to vote for you because what we want is the truth. What we want is what's actually going to help us. The gaslighting that's gone across the board with conservatives is slowly being peeled back, slowly but surely. I think Trump kind of accidentally went too far and people are going, how much of this was a lie? And I think that mask is kind of being removed. But the onus is on you to do it locally. And if you run local or state, and to make sure your community is on board with this discussion. You can't go in thinking, well, especially like say you're running if you're running specifically openly as a DSA, if you're going, I'm going to run on the DSA ticket, I want to run as a DSA candidate. You have to make it clear that you are not going like, I only am running to support folks who identify with me. You're going, this is why my policy, my opinions are the best for this district. It's a shame that socialism as a word has been used as like a catch-all, like it's bad, it's communist, blah, blah. Every single bad thing under the sun. Well, socialism for billionaires is called just assistance. We're just helping them out a little bit. Once you kind of break that in folks, like you go, you ever realize that they get all the money and the support from the government and we get nothing when we need it the most? That type of talk and that type of down-to-earth language is what's going to get people who might not be informed about this because that's how the system is built. They're not meant to understand this stuff. They're told not to. That's the type of stuff you have to consider when you go in. And I'm sorry, I always like to cover so many bases. I know the question was like on research and specific policy. The best thing about government, at least still, hopefully we continue that way, is most of the stuff is publicly available. Most of it. You go online, you can see what the bill was. You can see the language. You can find the vote counts. There's a great website. I used it for a lot of my campaign to do research on my opponent. Vote Smart, great website. They kind of go down the list. They pull out a lot of key votes, like big ones that you can go, oh, okay, like I understand why this got the traction it did. But you want to dive in on that on the public record, but you also want to do your own research. You want to get a lot of different opinions from local people, from state, national, like different ways that things work. Because let's be honest, there's policy that sounded good. In practice, it didn't work out too well. Even like the crime bill from the 90s, like on paper, everybody supported it, even minority communities. They're like, yeah, we kind of need this right now. Like, let's do this. Next thing you know, it's like, oh, this was not the way to go. We made way too many mistakes in how we implemented it. We tried, we failed. We need to come back and hit the table again. You want to be as prepped as possible and look at what's worked and what hasn't. And that's how you really shape up your policy. If it's common sense and it's going to benefit people, they're going to like it. If you try to make it, it has to be pretty specific. You don't want to go too, it's a one catch-all fix. You exemplify by the fact that everything is tied together. Make sure that that's clear. It's not, no politician should ever go, I'm going to raise everybody's wages. I'm going to fix every single problem. I'm going to do everything. You got to explain bit by bit what you're doing in your term to make that step-by-step process one step further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the study up question was specifically about electoral finance laws. Is that something you had to personally sort of look into, or did the party provide support, or staff?
Thankfully, the state also sends a thing like, here's what you can do and here's what you can't do. Okay. So when you're running, there is a system of support. They also have to do that because they don't want you breaking the law. Like, that's a whole headache for them. So the state has an obligation to go, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. It's tough. I mean, running a grassroots campaign is tough, but to me, it felt like the only right thing to do. For me, and especially with COVID, it was difficult for me to ask working people and folks that I knew, hey, can you spare some cash for my campaign? I know things are tough right now, but to me, that hurt a lot. I'm hoping by the time folks are running, if nobody's running now, I guess probably about 2 years or 1 year, depending, I hope things are better. And I hope that there's a way that you can kind of tackle campaign finance without feeling bad. Because I genuinely was like, what am I doing? How can I ask people right now to their money when we're all struggling? But folks have been extremely supportive. I got help, thankfully, from some of the advocacy groups, the ones that are really pushing for progress and change. The ones who eventually, if this stuff gets done, they won't be able to give me any money, which is good. They can focus on making sure their message gets out. But I would advise, if you're doing it, if you're running a campaign, just make sure you're doing everything legal. Don't get yourself in trouble. Pay attention to the rules.
Yeah, and excuse me, I imagine you'll be busy over the next couple of weeks, but yeah, it'd be great maybe to have some conversations in the future for our members. You could share your experience and maybe grease the wheels for some other folks to run as well. And you mentioned the grassroots campaign and asking for donations. I'm sure you have a website or other places where people can go if you care to share.
Yeah, it's Dylan, DYLAN, Rice, RICE, 4FORNY.com. That's Dylan Rice for New York, but NY. When you go at the first, I think, top right button, it says donate. It brings you to the ActBlue account. That's what the Democratic Party does to just streamline funding. Best way to do it, make your life easy. Don't write a check. Don't send in the mail. It's who wants to do that. But do it on the computer. The internet's great. The easiest way to do it. Please, if you can contribute, please do. It helps us push it over the edge. Honestly, I think if any year this district is going to flip, it's this one. Everything is kind of aligning with the stars. I think folks are sick and tired of the status quo, and the Republican collapse is benefiting everybody down the ballot. I think this might rival 2018 blue wave, but you gotta vote. You gotta vote. Do not be disenchanted. Do not try, don't buy into that concept. I'll be the first one. The Democratic Party has so many flaws. I'm running as a Democrat. I'm willing to admit that. There's a lot of stuff within the party we got to address, but my God, it's not going to happen if you don't vote. It's not going to happen if you just kind of abandon the process. We need to utilize the things that exist right now to get what deserves to come out of it. You can't just abandon it and buy into that conservative talking point. The whole system's rigged. Forget it. It's rigged when you don't participate, because the folks who did were the ones that they wanted to participate. You have to go to the ballot box. You have to vote. Vote for down ballot candidates. Research them. Do the research on them. Make sure if there's any propositions, you do the research on that as well. Be informed. Do not let this apathy that has infected our country affect you and go, there's nothing I can do, because that's how we lose in a second, is when you buy into that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and for anybody listening to this, yeah, I think donating to campaigns like Dylan's are all the more important, since I'm sure Dylan's opponent is not adhering to, or at least being as selective in his funding sources as Dylan outlined earlier.
If you're working in the development industry or real estate industry, yeah, you're not going to want to donate to me. My opponent might want your services, but I'm not really on board with the quick cash grab developments and boxing out middle class and working families. So
Yeah.
that's the difference between.
Yeah, and then of course, many of us are not able to donate monetarily right now, but I'm sure there are also volunteer opportunities you can find out about on the website. You can donate your time if you don't have the cash, equally, if not more important. But yeah, Dylan, I think we've been talking for about an hour now. So, but it was really great conversation. Yeah.
I'm always like, I got to hit every piece of context. Like, I hate ever like, oh no, I forgot to mention that. I always feel like I might overextend. I hope that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, no complaints here. It was all good stuff. And appreciate the time. And I think we'll wrap it up here. And, you know, wish you the best of luck over the next couple of weeks and on election day. Unfortunately, I'm not a resident of your district. If I was, you would certainly have my vote. Yeah. And, yeah, thanks a lot. And guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for watching. And yes, please vote, please.
Yeah.
Go to the polls.
All right. Thanks, Dylan.
No problem.